Good morning, good day, and good evening to wherever you are today joining us. I'm very excited to have us here at this topic about the onshore China GSS market, a very, very interesting market with more than 100 billion of issuance in 2022. This year, we are already matching last year's issuance numbers. That makes the onshore market twice the size of the Asian G3, meaning mostly US dollar-based issuance, and also twice the size of the GSSS market in the USA. So definitely a market to watch out for. I'm very excited with the panel that we have today. We have Shannon Sun, the Executive Director at CICC for the Fixed Income, Commodities and Currencies Department. She's in charge of the global institutions, the distribution with the Global Credit Group, therefore speaks to a lot of foreign investors. CICC also has a fixed income ESG metrics research product to evaluate the performance of more than 4,000 Chinese bond issuers. And we'll ask her about the arranger and liquidity providers view before we then hand over to Rico, the Senior Director, Asia Pacific at ICMA. He works very closely with regulators, financial institutions, and other organizations who are active in capital markets in the region to promote and to maintain the best practices in that space. And he'll tell us a little bit about the standards in China and give us a primer. And then we can hand over to POC, the financial sector specialist at the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department at the Asian Development Bank. He is leading the Asian Bond Market Initiative, which is established by ASEAN +3, the +3 are China, Japan, and Korea. The initiative is intended to develop local currency bond markets in the region and to develop that sustainable finance ecosystem. He's also supporting the implementation of the ASEAN Green, Social, Sustainability and Other Labeled Bonds initiative in Southeast Asia. With that brief introduction, I would like to welcome Shannon to help us give an arranger view and liquidity providers view of that market, please.
Sure, thanks, Martin. Thanks for having me. Since I'm the first speaker, I'm just going to first start from a very brief introduction of how the Chinese onshore green bond market evolved over the years. We pretty much started in 2015. So the development of the Chinese green bond market began with top-level design. In 2015, the PBOC announced plans to introduce green bonds to the interbank market. And in 2016, other regulatory arrangements, including from NDRC, the stock exchanges, NAFMI, all issued notices to guide the issuance of green corporate bonds, green ABS, all sorts of green debt financing instruments. And then from 2016 to 2020 is where the Chinese green bond market started to evolve, especially mechanism-wise began to improve. So this slide mostly shows from the issuance side, including in 2016, PBOC, Ministry of Finance, NDRC, CSRC jointly issued the guidelines for establishing the green financial system with a stated aim to unify and improve relevant supervision rules and standards for green bonds. Subsequently, various regulators introduced.
Okay, at this point, if Shannon is not coming back, Rico, I might call on you if you don't mind to maybe bring a slot forward a little bit. So Rico, why don't we kind of reset, talk a little bit about the standards and the primer. I think it'd be very interesting to see how they have evolved over time and what are the developments that you have seen in this space.
Thank you, Martin. It's lovely to be part of the discussion. I think this is very important to give such introduction, and more importantly, what's happening right now in China's green bond market, because it's the attention of the international investor community in particular, because as you know, in the international market, the demand is very, very big. However, the supply of the green bonds, etc., all right now we call sustainable bonds, they are not enough. And the situation in China is the opposite. so the supply of those bonds actually very, very good. But obviously the investor community, I mean the onshore Chinese investors, maybe they are not that sophisticated as when you compare with their international peers. So they may not focus that much on this sustainability. So how to link or bridge the gap between the Chinese issuers and also the international investors actually will be very crucial. Maybe I briefly just mention about the standards because Shannon actually mentioned about the history of the green bond standards. I follow her comments. So basically, the whole green finance is from the green bonds, and green bond actually was initiated by the green bond principle, which is our standards. So as you know, in 2014, we basically released the first version of the green bond principles, and over the last few years, it's been very, very successful. And the same story in China. So as Shannon mentioned, the first green bond rules in China was released in December 2015, basically just 1.5 years later. So in that sense, you can tell China is really focused on the big developments of green finance and to put a lot of resources to keep the standards consistent with international ones, and also very sort of like very much the attention to focus on this area. So this is very positive. Since then, I still remember in 2015, after the first green bond rules, which is the PBOC financial green bonds rules, released in 2016, Chinese onshore market is already the biggest one in the world. So we must give a lot of compliments to the regulators to develop this market, and I think they should deserve such credits. And then followed by exchange green bond rules, NDRC, NAFB green bond rules. So basically, it's really developing so well. However, I want to point out maybe two kind of like important topics missing. First is how to extend such work from the green to the more broadly the sustainability picture, including social sustainability bonds and the latest products, the SLB, the sustainability linked bonds. Second is how to link that to basically help transition of those hard to abate sectors. So they are maybe not that qualified green bond issues. So how to allow them to tap the debt capital market and finance those transition pathway. These are very important to basically move the country to carbon neutrality and also to consistent with the Paris Agreement. So over the last 2 and 3 years, we have seen some very positive developments. Particularly, I have to give the credit to NAFB. The first is that they introduced such new products such as sustainability linked bonds, and also some pilot program on social bond and sustainability bonds as well. Second, they have some innovation as well, say like a transition bond, carbon neutrality bonds. These are all very good, and including blue bond as well. But also there are certain like deviation from the international standards. So from an ICMA perspective, for example, transition is more on the on the labeling for the issues, meaning when we talk about the carbon neutrality or transition, it's about a pathway, it's about trajectory, basically to move from relatively low point to a higher point. It's about the journey, how you transition from maybe brown to green. So in that sense, when we talk about the use of proceeds bond, just like a green bond, maybe it's not that helpful because you cannot just rely on those specific projects to help you transition from point 1 to point B. So our labeling, the transition, is on the issues, not on the product. It's not the use of proceeds bond. So that's also the purpose why we developed the new product, SLB, the Sustainability Linked Bond. Also, from name perspective, don't get me wrong, carbon neutrality bonds issued onshore actually is a very green bond, and the NAFB and other regulators made it very clear these are the subgroup under the green bond. However, as I said, the name is actually confusing because from international audience, we may think this is something related to the transition, carbon neutrality target, etc. But actually, it's just a subgroup under the green bonds. So is the blue bond. So overall, we need to point out they are very good green bonds. International investors definitely need to consider those investment opportunities. Meanwhile, we should see their difference from our international understanding and try to separate them and understand better about what's going on right now in China. And I also
Rico,
want to point out, yes.
Just quickly, you mentioned that other types of labels have been very important to progress on that roadmap, including things like sustainability-linked bonds. Are you expecting that we may need additional labels going forward, or have we found all the labels that we need right now?
Currently, I would say we only see just like our topic, like a GSSS bond. We currently product-wise, we only see 4 mainstream products, which are green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds. They are user proceed bond, and also the sustainability linked bonds. So currently, we don't see a demand, at least from our membership base, that we need to create another labeling of a new product, a new asset class. There's no, maybe we haven't reached there, but from
Sure.
my perspective, I'm pretty open.
And right now, we still see that green bonds take the largest share of the issuance compared to the other labels. Do you expect that to even out a bit more and move towards one or any of the other labels, or do you think that will remain?
I think currently, at least these 2-3 years, I think the market share will remain. So green bond is definitely mainstream, accounts for a half of the sustainable bond market. Then social sustainability probably accounts for 20% respectively. Then the rest of 10% belongs to SLB. So overall, I think this is still healthy and meet the expectation from the international investors. I think that this, all of them can contribute to the Paris Agreement targets and move such funding to finance those right projects and also the right issue names.
And we had sort of very new China green bond principles announced just earlier this year in 2022. Sort of what led to that, and sort of what are the convergence streams with the other ICMA principles? Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned about the China GBP. You can tell from the names that basically they copied the model from the green bond principles. They call it the China GBP. So it's not sort of like a regulation. It's more like a petition to harmonize the onshore different green bonds. So first is the China GBP articulates its reference to ICMA green bond principles explicitly. Second, I think that this is a really good effort to call for such harmonization. As I said, it's very important. The most, I think, important development, or maybe the major points that we need to note out of the China GBP is the 100% user proceed approach. So as you know, I need to give a more a large, sort of a broad overview. So as you know, the Chinese debt capital market sometimes it's quite confusing to the international audience because you can say it's a little bit fragmental and basically different regulators, different markets. So right now, within the whole bond market, just like the problem we are facing in the green bond market. So we have the PBOC financial bonds, we have the NAFB, the green debt financing instrument, then NDRC green enterprise bonds, then exchange market, the green bond issued there as well. So the broad picture is we have 4 different regulators and different types of green bonds with different regulations. So the PBOC financial, the green financial bond was the first one, the first regulation. Then NAFME obviously followed tightly about the approach by PBOC. So their green bond rules are largely consistent with international standards, i.e. ICMA's green bond principles from the very beginning. However, the exchange market and the NDRC enterprise bond, they are taking different approach. For example, exchange market, they only require like 70% of the user proceeds can be used for the green bond projects. That's enough. They can label such bonds as a green bond. NDRC, even worse, 50%. So that's basically the major criticism from the international market participants to express their concerns about greenwashing. So now the China GBP actually really called for such harmonization, particularly exchange market already basically adopted the 100% user proceed concept. And going forward, we can be sure that the exchange market actually consistent with the international market already. Now, the only one obviously left behind is NDRC Green Enterprise Bond. We don't know yet about the timeline when NDRC will be on board, but obviously it's quite positive because the Green Enterprise Bond, the market share is not that big anyway. The majority of the green bonds,
on this one, just a quick question from the audience. Yeah. Those NDRC bonds, are they also in scope for those new green bond guidelines?
Not really. Not for this new.
That's China because of their requirements on the use of proceeds that you just mentioned.
That's right. So, I mean, again, the NDRC enterprise bond, the market share is not that big anyway. So the large portion of the green bond issued in onshore China, actually, they are very good green bonds. And I can tell just from standard perspective, they are very much consistent with international requirements. So if you ask me, I think, they are very good investment opportunities. And I have less concern about whether there are certain things maybe not within the expectation of the international investors. If you ask me some like really tiny, minor differences between the China GBP versus our ICMA GBP, they are really not that important. For example, as you know, the new version of ICMA Green Bond Principle, we require one requirement is we actually ask for issuers to disclose their bond framework on top of their, regular disclosure. So obviously the China GBP is not there yet, but sometimes some other stuff they require more detailed things. For example, the China GBP requires underlying materials for the green bonds, to be kept for at least 2 years after the bonds maturity. It's actually, give very detailed requirements in terms of, for example, the temporarily unallocated bond proceeds. So they actually give a very very detailed requirements when you compare with ICMA green bond principles. I think that's basically reflects the market's practice in the onshore market.
Just one last question before we close this section off. Comparison to other local markets or international markets. I mean, let's talk about local markets in Asia. How do you see that development? If you can have a brief comment on that.
I think it's quite. I wouldn't have major concerns if you compare with other jurisdictions in Asia. They all have different developments and different rules. Overall, they develop their domestic standards based on the ICMA standards. So that's very encouraging. But meanwhile, different regulators and also different jurisdictions taking different approaches. We respect that. I think anything to basically contribute to the Paris Agreement targets and just make our work, more sustainable, it's always positive. But back to the capital markets, particularly from standards perspective, I want to say first is, it's very technical. Sometimes it's basically we shouldn't emphasize too much about the so-called local characters. We have always heard China emphasize so-called Chinese characters, China characters. Basically, they have certain different approach when they compare with other standards. I think if every jurisdiction they always have their own things, their difficulties. If we emphasize too much about those specific things, maybe that's not that helpful. I think then we don't say you need to have the same standards, but you at least should have a consistent approach. Just and this is sort of like within the expectation from the international community. Second is just to add more transparency, because as I said, currently the onshore market is quite complicated. And just back to our green bond market, you need to basically showcase the right platforms, data to identify those good green bonds, which actually international investors like to invest. You should have the right sort of like methodology to help identify those things, the scope of those products that are available for the international investors to look at. Third is, I think we definitely welcome more input from the Chinese participants and also regulators. They need to just voice out, because the international community is always very diversified, and they need to participate into this discussion to really bring in their input. I think that actually help shape up our standards and also the international market practice. For example, I know Chinese regulators is the first one to start to regulate the external reviewers. So that's actually will have impact on other jurisdictions, even in EU. So I think it's always interaction, and certain pilot programs is really nice to have. For example, like the common ground taxonomy. I know that certain banks actually issued their green bonds in Hong Kong to reference to those common ground taxonomy. So those are very positive developments.
Very good. Thank you so much, Rico. We need consistent approach rather than everybody following the same standard. Very interesting. I'll try Shannon. Are you there now? Can you? Is your connection back?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Very clear. Maybe we'll try this time just with your audio.
So I'm going to shorten definitely on the first page, as Rico covered most of it. Just to recap, we started in 2015 and gradually improved in 2016 to 2020. And Rico also mentioned July this year, there was a new China bond principles that was formulated. A few aspects includes user proceeds must be 100% earmarked for green projects, and selection process should be simplified, specified, and management of the proceeds are more standardized. For example, opening new accounts or a dedicated ledger to ensure that the proceeds are tracked, etc. This is more from the investor side. It's from the investment side. So in July 2021, the PBOC announced plan for green finance evaluation of financial institutions. This includes for policy banks like CDB, for state-owned banks, joint stock banks, Bank of Beijing, Jiangsu, Shanghai, etc. And this means that the green credit, green bonds, and financial services are going to be formally included into PBOC's financial institution ratings. The green finance evaluation includes quantitative and qualitative. For example, we put some examples here. For example, for quantitative, the comparison is vertical and horizontal. For proportion of total green finance, the total percentage is 25%. So 10% in vertical, which is comparing to the average of this institution in the last 3 quarters, and 15% in horizontal, which is comparing to the average of all participating institutions in the current quarter. And other
Shannon,
right?
Can I just ask you? This is quite relevant. So what does this mean if this is included in the PBOC's financial institution rating? What's the implication for the institutions, basically?
Basically, that they need to buy more green products, including green bonds. And I'm also going to talk about it a little bit more in the further slides where it also includes it also improves liquidity because more banks are buying these products. It's especially since I mentioned it's horizontal and vertical. So like comparing to yourself in the past few quarters, you need to buy more, and also improves the like the valuation or the performance of green bonds. Also have some numbers in the further slides. So here I'm just showing that the indicators are quite complex. Quantitative 4 indicators not going to read through, and qualitative 3 important indicators, including national financial policy, formulation and implementation of green finance system, etc. So we'll have more numbers in the further slides. Maybe let's go to slide 3, which is on market size. So just going to recap, I think we also mentioned most of the numbers. Basically, since 2016, the size has increased year by year, and this year we already reached an all-high, even with 2 months short. Right now, the total size of the outstanding balance is 1.44 trillion, and a little bit on the standards. So the bonds that are CBI fulfill CBI standards is between 54 to 74% over the past few years, and about 66% in the last year. Also on carbon neutral bonds, I know we've also mentioned it's an important driving force. There's a total of almost 400 bonds that are issued, and the size is over 400 billion, so also quite large. And the issuers are actually, the average rating is actually better than the green bonds in general. And in terms of the industries, public utilities is the dominating one with more than 50%. And maturity-wise, it's pretty much all short, about over 80% is less than 5 years. So let's go to the next page. And the next page. So this is a little bit on issuer profile. So the market has always been dominated by high ratings since 2016. The lowest level appeared in 2017 and 2020, but both over 50% for AAA. Last year and this year, the percentage for AAA was 71% instead of 78%. You can also see the majority are SOEs. The tenor tends to be short, less than 3 years is 87%, 84% last year and this year. By industry, the majority are industrial, financial, and public utilities. This year, financials are at the top, over 50%, and public utilities about 26%. The structure was a little bit different last year, where public utilities was more than 40%, financials a little over 30%.
And by the way, since this is the GSSS bonds, how does this compare, for example, by the tenor or the industry to the overall market? Is that shorter than the overall market? Or is that a very different industry composition?
Industry composition is a little bit different, and also tenor-wise, it's a little bit shorter. Rating-wise, should be a little bit better than the overall market.
Thank you.
Sure, and let's go to the next page. So in general, for the investor scope, the next page, please. So in general, the investor structure is dominated by commercial banks for the whole market, especially in the interbank market, which is where most bonds are traded. More than half of the market size is with commercial banks. Investors in the exchange market is more diverse. Foreign investors hold about 2.4% of the interbank market, and QP investors about 2% of the exchange bonds. For green bonds, so the specific numbers are from 2019, and banks are over 50%, followed by fund products. As we know, the development of the market has grown, and including security firms, insurance companies, overseas institutions have all participated since 2019. For updated info, we only found the top 10 in each category. So for example, you can see CICC is in top 10 of securities, funds, and foundations, and we are number 2 in this category and number 1 in security firms. As Martin mentioned at the beginning, we designed the CICC fixed income ESG metrics, which evaluates more than 4,000 Chinese issuers. So this is on the ESG performance. So it's more on the corporate, a little bit different from green bonds, where it's mostly on project. But anyhow shows our strong focus on investing ESG, including green bonds. So a little bit on the different industries. Some of the numbers that we found includes for commercial banks, they have issued more ESG wealth managed products. So this year there were more than 200 ESG products that were issued, including 93 fixed income products, which is the highest proportion. About 56% are issued by state-owned banks and a third by joint stock commercial banks. And in the first half, the wealth management market has issued over 20 billion with about 1.4 times year-on-year growth. For insurance industry, there was a speech by Du Lin, who is the director for Fund Utilization Supervision Department at CBIRC. He said that the total that's invested by the insurance industry into all green products, including carbon neutrality, green development related industries through both bonds, asset management products, equities, etc. The total size should be over RMB 1 trillion. We don't have the specific numbers for bonds, but the companies are basically, he mentioned that these are includes that equity portfolio and other long-term financial support. For trust, we have numbers from 2020, which is the outstanding green trust asset is over 350 billion RMB, which is also an increase of about 7%. I also want to mention a little bit about offshore investor participation. We don't have much specific numbers on these. We have the numbers on the total participation by offshore investors into the whole market, which is about 2 to 3% of the total custodian size, of which more than 80% is still on rates bonds, so CGBs, CDBs, etc. So from the supply side, the Chinese rates bond is only about less than 20% of the green bond market. So the majority of the supply is still from credit, including the industries we discussed, like utilities, industrial, financial, etc. Because a lot of the offshore investors are still only looking at rates bonds, and it's going to be difficult for rates mandate to start looking at Chinese industries. However, we do see more and more Asian ESG funds that are launched, including in Singapore and also in Hong Kong, in other areas where they look at Asian ESG names, including CICC Asset Management Offshore. And these funds have Asian focus, and given the size of the Chinese green bond market, we have attracted much of these allocations. Another trend that we expect is more investors will be interested.
Shannon, I think we're losing your audio again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you again.
So like I mentioned, want to discuss a little bit on the exchange bond market, because we think the trend is going to be offshore investors are going to be more interested in corporate bonds, because corporate bonds, well, they started out with listed public companies, which means better data disclosure and better offshore recognition. And it's also a major part of the green bond market, about 29% of the market. Also, there's new regulatory changes in the exchange market that encourages more offshore participation, including the announced relevant measures to facilitate investment of overseas institutions to China's bond market. And this is mostly targeted to the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges, which both followed up with detailed measures. And basically, it's going to simplify the registration and account opening process for foreign investors into the exchange market, and also allow exchange derivatives to be available for offshore investors. This is pretty much the first time, give or take a few exceptions, that offshore investors are allowed to invest in derivatives. So these measures we think are going to encourage more foreign investors to participate in the exchange market in general. And given that corporate bonds are mostly listed companies, we think that they're going to be more interested in the exchange green bond market in general. So that's on the investor structure. And please go to the next page and next page.
So a little bit on the pricing, just looking at the bond index first. So as we know, so this is a China bond index versus China credit green bond index. Just want to talk a little bit about when the epidemic broke out in 2020, we also saw the Barclays Global Corporate Bond Index versus the Barclays MSCI Green Bond Index. The green bond definitely performed better. So in China, as you can see from this graph, especially after 2021, because a lot of the banks were buying new green financial products, including green bonds. And this is a rather new regulation, so they were starting to buy. So I think it's quite apparent that from 2021 that the index is performing better. And then go to the next page. And this is some of the examples I listed out. For example, if you look at the CDB green bond, the transacted price is usually at or lower than the China bond valuation levels. China bond valuation levels is basically what onshore investors use sort of as their valuation standards, like a benchmark, I'd say.
By the way, for that performance difference, is some of that attributable to interest rates, given that you also mentioned green bond have a slightly shorter duration profile as the general compared to the general market?
Well, for example, for Three Gorges, I actually used bonds that are pretty much in the same tenor. I mean, give or take a few months maybe, but we can still see that, well, these are just a few examples that I put here. But I think in general, there is a green premium and the green bonds are performing a little bit better, both the prices and the liquidity, especially given that we have so many large banks that are buying into this market since a little over a year ago.
Thank you.
So for example, for Three Gorges, it's maturity 1 to 3 years, and I put a few different tickers here just to compare. The bids and offers are definitely more active for the green bonds. So this is on liquidity, like I already said. Well, the liquidity started picking up in 2018. The green bonds were traded at about 640 billion in 2019, 879 billion in 2020, and a little over 1 trillion in 2021, and already over 1,100 billion this year, and we're 2 months short. So almost half the number that we traded in 2019. The cash turnover of green bonds also increased 17% compared to the whole year of 2021. And listed out a few examples here again from different industries, including financials, utilities, etc. So let's go to the next page. This is on assessment. So like Rico also mentioned, this is actually put into regulation first in 2017, but even more in 2022, where the Green Bond Standard Committee issued announcement officially announcing the results of market-based evaluation of green bond evaluation and certification agencies, with 18 agencies registered with the Green Bond Standard Committee, including professional services such as accounting firms, credit rating agencies, and consulting companies, etc. And this market-based evaluation will help strengthen the regulation of green bond evaluation through market-based screening. The independent professional market reputable third-party institutions will be formed to effectively play the role of gatekeeper. And in 2021, about 62% of the total bonds issued were certified, an increase of about 12% from the year before. The majority are certified by environmental consulting companies and credit rating agencies. So we can see the main content of it includes the pre-issuance compliance check, the project screening, decision-making system check, bond fund management system check, information disclosure and reporting system check, etc. And then post-issuance includes whether these systems are implemented and compliant, and whether the targeted environmental benefit of the green projects are achieved. This page also shows some of the examples from specific bonds. So regulators, self-regulatory associations, and stock exchanges have all formulated rules for post-issuance information disclosure and supervision. The frequency of the information disclosure is quite high, and more issuers are assigning third parties nowadays. Some bonds, such as sustainability-linked bonds, require mandatory engagement of third-party agency, and the frequency is at least once a year. The main requirements of post-issuance supervision include periodic evaluation reports, assessment opinions, and relevant information disclosure on the use of raised funds, environmental benefits, and green industry project progress. So below we show two examples. On the left side is a carbon neutral bond issued by CICC Wind Energy, and the reports include pre-issuance independent evaluation and certification of green debt financing instruments by Lianhe in April 2021. And then on the right, it's the post-issuance annual disclosure on the distribution of raised funds, environmental impact, and projects, and issue green tracking assessment certification by Lianhe in April 2022. On the right side is a similar example from ABC Leasing that the distribution of raised funds are disclosed quarterly. So that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you, Shannon. Very, very comprehensive overview. With that, I'm really curious about the development bank view on this whole topic. Maybe we can clear the slides for a moment. And Hock, if you could kindly join us. Really curious to get your view on this as the financial sector specialist.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin, and hope you can hear me okay. And good afternoon to everyone joining this webinar. So my presentation today will be a bit different from what Rico and Shannon has presented. So we'll be talking about how we can take the examples of China in developing the domestic green bond market, and we can replicate that in other developing countries in the region. So next slide, please. By way of introduction, what I am doing in ADB right now is we are serving as secretariat to the ASEAN +3 Asian Bond Market Initiative, or we call it ABMI, that Martin has briefly mentioned. So this ABMI was established by the ASEAN +3 finance ministers and central bank governors to develop the local currency bond market. So if many of you may recall, in 1997, it all began in Thailand, where I'm come from. We had the Asian financial crisis, right? In 97, we call it Tom Yam Goong crisis. And back then, not many of the ASEAN countries have the well-functioning corporate bond market, right? So when the crisis happened, many companies couldn't find additional funding. They couldn't go to the bank because the banks already have their own problems of non-performing loans. The stock market collapsed, and so many of companies had to shut down. So that's why the ASEAN +3 governments, ASEAN 10 countries plus Japan, Korea, and China decided that it was time for us to work together as a region to develop our own local currency corporate bond market. And this ABMI, was established in 2003, and ADB was tasked as secretariat of the ABMI from its very beginning. So most recently, given that we all know about the impact of climate change and also the social development, the ASEAN +3 finance ministers and central bank governors decided that it was time for ABMI to actually focus on sustainable finance. Right, so under Task Force 1 of the ABMI, which is of course co-chaired by China and Thailand, with the mandate to promote more issuances of local currency bonds, we were asked by the ministers and the governors to develop a regional technical assistance program to support the sustainable finance market development in the region. So with that, ADB also came out with a technical assistance program that help companies to issue sustainable bonds. We started that TA with only green bonds, but as many of you know, because of the pandemic and the government decided that it was very important for us to expand the TA to cover other, type of use of proceeds bonds. So we expanded TA to cover social bonds and also sustainability bond as well. So as an ADB, as a secretariat, we need to report our progress and our activities to the finance ministers and also the governors on an annual basis. So next slide, please. I think we have talked a lot about the numbers. I think Shannon also showed some numbers in her slides. But what I really want to show here is that we all know, that the green bond market in China is among the largest in the world. Of course, definitely the largest in the region, right? So if we look at the chart on the right-hand side, we see that majority of the bond issued by the PRC are green bonds because of the policy from the government, because of the directions, because of the guidance. That's why we have so many green bond issuers from China and making it China among the largest green bond market in the world. But if we look at the other type of use of proceeds bonds, we see more companies in Japan and Korea are issuing social bonds. Majority Japan and Korean issuers take almost 100% of the social bond issuance. I think that small portion come from Thailand, where we also see some issuers from Thailand issuing a social bond as well. And of course, we also see more mixture of countries and also issuers who are issuing sustainability bonds as well as the sustainability linked bonds, because that also gives the issuers more flexibility in terms of the use of proceeds, because sustainability bonds allows companies to use their proceeds to finance both green and social projects. So next slide, please.
By the way, Bob, sorry, quick question.
Yes?
These numbers, this is only local currency market, or does also include offshore issuance from these countries?
That's only local currency market. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, in response to the request from the ASEAN Pacific government, ADB, we developed that digital technical assistance program. You can find more information about this TA in the link there. The TA paper is publicly available. So under this program, it's the first program that we do under the ABMI that actually do to create transactions, right? So under this program, we provide guidance to issuers. Actually, we work very closely with them. We provide hand-holding support to companies in ASEAN Pacific to issue sustainable bonds in local currencies. And of course, once we have good understanding about the companies, investment plans, about what they do, we can help them to develop the framework. And of course, this framework needs to be aligned with the ICMA principles as well as the ASEAN principles that I will talk about in the next few slides. And we understand that different countries has different needs, right? What is needed in Thailand could be different from Indonesia or the Philippines. So our program is flexible enough to provide technical support to address market specific constraints. And I will discuss that in a bit more detail later on as well. And that's on the supply side. We realize that there are lots of investors out there, not just in Asia, not just in China, but also in developing countries in ASEAN, that many investors are hoping to they're looking for ESG investment opportunities. But they have told us that the supplies are enough for them to invest. That's why we come out with the TA to increase the supply of sustainable bonds. At the same time, we also try to promote more demand. We have the Asian Bonds online website that publicize the information about local currency bond market development in all of the 14 economies in ASEAN Pacific. And we also publish the detailed guidance for issuing green bonds in developing countries. And this document was translated into a few languages, in Thai, in Vietnamese, in Cambodian, Khmer, as well as in Bahasa, Indonesia. So these documents, what we do, we try to document our experience, working with companies, working with investors in the region. And of course, we also look to China, as a good example about, what we could do, what we could learn from China when we help ASEAN countries develop their market. So if you move to the next slide, please. So I have come out with a few bullet points, that summarize, the lessons, from the PRC's experience. First, and the most important one is that if you look at the Chinese market, you probably see that there are, lots of, local green bond verifiers there, right? So, those, I'm looking at the Climate Bonds Initiative website right now, and I see that there are 14 verifiers in the PRC. So this is something that, we also look at China, and, there are also, Japanese models as well. So we also try to find potential candidates from ASEAN who would be interested to offer this kind of service to their local issuers. Because the most important point about having a local green bond verifier is that imagine if we could, have someone who work in the same country as you, who work in the same time zone as you, and most importantly, who speak the same language as you, right? That would actually, make your life much easier when it comes to green bond issuance. Without the local verifiers, as many of you might know, companies need to engage international firms. Of course, the first challenge is that all communication needs to be in English. But of course, as you may know, in ASEAN or even in China itself, some of the documents, contracts, reports are in local language. So it takes time even to communicate with international verifiers. And some of them are even working in different time zones, right? So that even makes the communication much more challenging. And what we are hoping to see is that the local green bond verifiers might be able to charge with a lower fee. We try to promote this as a public service, other than having, private sector company that are offering this service. We are also trying to discuss with some of the local public universities who might be able or might be willing to offer this kind of service to the local issuers. They would allow smaller companies to come to the market as well. So that's the first lesson that we learned from China. In China, there are 14 local verifiers. All of them are accredited by the Climate Bonds Initiative, by CBI. In ASEAN, we only have 3 right now. We have TRIS rating from Thailand. We have RAM Sustainability from Malaysia. And most recently, we have Fin Group from Vietnam. So we have been working very closely with these entities, and I'm pleased to say that all 3 of them are also approved by the CBI. So, they can bring in international practices, international expertise into the local market. So that's why we are, working very closely with them. And most importantly, they also contribute to the development of the local talent as well. That's the first point. On the second point is that I would say, having the clear guidance or support from the regulators, from the government is super important, right? In China, we have the Green Bond Catalog, we have the Common Ground Taxonomy. In ASEAN, we are also developing our own ASEAN Sustainable Finance Taxonomy as well. So this would be a sort of, common message to the market that, these projects are green enough from the regulators or from the investors' point of view. And we feel that, having the regulatory environment or clarity from the regulators is super important. So as many of you might know, in ASEAN, the ACMF or the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, they launched the ASEAN Green, Social and Sustainability Bond Standard in 2017 and 2018, respectively. The Green Bond Standard came first in 2017. And also the Social and Sustainability Bond Standards was issued in 2018, with the support from RICO and also our friends at ICMA. So as soon as those standards were introduced on the right-hand side chart, you see that there was a huge jump increase in the issuance of ASEAN label sustainable bonds, right? So as soon as this standards were introduced in 2018, we saw a huge increase in issuances. And until now, I think we have about, more than 30 billion worth of US dollars sustainable bonds issued in alignment with the ASEAN standards. And of course, grant and schemes and also incentives are very important. As a development bank, we cannot provide the grant schemes for issuers. So what we come in is, with technical support. And often the case, we find that, many companies are actually, valuing this kind of support even more than financial support. right? Because they have the capacity, they can pay for external review. But what they really need is someone who can provide hand-holding support to them, who can tell them, who can convince them that what they are going to do, what they are going to invest in is green enough or social enough from investors' point of view, and whether those projects align with the international standards. That's really the role of the development bank. And of course, we are also working very closely with some of the ASEAN regulators, because some of the grant schemes and incentives are only provided to companies that have already issued the bond, right? But what happens before that is not provided, right? It's not given. So ADB will come in and help companies to issue the bond. And once that's issued, of course, they can apply for the grant scheme or the incentive from their respective government. So there's a role for development banks to play here. And also, I would say the international cooperation in ASEAN Pacific is extremely important as well. That's why our TA program, our support to the issuers, investors, supported by the PRC, Ministry of Finance, and I would say this is really important from investors and issuers point of view. So let me go to the next slide. With the support from the PRC's Ministry of Finance, as I said, we were able to develop some of the local green bond verifiers in ASEAN. We have 3 already. And of course, going forward, what we are hoping to do is that we're trying to create a network of local green bond verifiers in the region. Of course, it would also be a good way for ASEAN verifiers. And they can also learn from the experience of the local verifiers in China as well. And of course, going forward, they can share their experience, they can share their own case studies among themselves. And secondly, we also organize, market awareness and capacity building programs. As I said, we published the handbook, and we also organize, webinars. Only for the last 2 years, I think we organized almost 40 webinars, and we attracted more than 4,000 participants. I think some of you may have participated in our webinars. And the third point is that, as I said, we provide technical support and hand-holding support to potential issuers. We have already completed 4 transactions, maybe even more now. Some of them are green bond issuers, and some of them are social and sustainability bond issuers. You might imagine, or you might be wondering why only Thai issuers from Thailand are listed there. It's just because I was stuck in Thailand for the last 2 years. I couldn't travel to other countries. But of course, this program is for ASEAN plus 3. So we will be also providing technical support to companies from other countries as well. And most recently, not on the slide, we supported the first corporate green bond issuer ever issued in Cambodia. So I think the bond will be listed, later this year. And also, lastly, we also conduct the green bond market survey report, and we're gonna launch that on the 24th of November together with the GGGI. I think this study is very important because, as an ADB, we also provide, regulatory or, policy advice to the government, right? So it is also very important for us to have good understanding about the market in each country. As I said, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So this survey really gives us, insights into the views or the understanding or perception from the investors as well as the underwriters. This really help us, to help governments to formulate their policies. So we will be issuing, yes?
So a quick question from the audience, since you mentioned the technical and hand-on support for the issuers. Are there any costs involved for the issuers to make use of that?
No, this is free.
Wow, fantastic.
This is free of charge. But as you might know, our team is small. We cannot support all the issuers, right? So, if any of the participants, I don't see who you are, but if any of you are interested, please feel free to get in touch with me. I have my email address on the cover page on the first slide. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, next slide, please. And also, what we are trying to promote is that, we want to streamline, cross-border fundraising, also issuances within the region. At ADB, we introduced a single submission form. I know I have been over the time limit, so I'll be very quick. we introduced a single submission form, a document that allows issuers to submit the same application to multiple regulators in different countries. So previously, let's say if you are an issuer from Hong Kong and you want to issue bond in Thailand, in the Philippines, in Singapore at the same time, right? You need to prepare the filing of prospectus or the info memo based on the regulation of the Thai regulator, the Philippine regulator, the Singapore regulator. They could be different, right? But with a single submission form, you can use the same document and you submit to all three regulators at the same time, right? And the good thing is that this form can be in English. It doesn't have to be in local language, right? So we have been promoting the AMBIF for the past few years. And if any of you are interested in knowing more about the AMBIF program, please also let us know as well. Next slide, please. Currently, there are 4 markets that are part of AMBIF. Of course, Hong Kong, China is one of them. And also Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Cambodia, and the Philippines. So if there's companies who also want to issue bonds in this market, doesn't have to be a thematic bond, it can be conventional bond. They can also use AMBIF. And we also publish the implementation guidelines for each of the participating economies. So, for companies who want to issue bonds in Thailand, in an AMBIF bond, you can also refer to this implementation guidelines. It lays out, step by step on the issuance process of what you need to do. Right. So, this is something that, we are trying to promote within ADB, and also together with the CGIF, the Credit Guarantee and Investment Facility. I think we already have seen, 3 or 4, AMBIF sustainable bonds, issued in the region already. So with that, I will stop here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Martin. Back to you.
Thank you, Pok. Very interesting. I think we're coming to the end of the session. I hope that you had a good chance of getting an overview of the onshore China market for green bonds and other label bonds as well. As a quick side note, under Market Node, which is a subsidiary that we have in SGX, we have a tool called Green Node that allows all investors access to data on green bonds from onshore China, including a translation into English. There's 200 issuers and 300 bonds on the platform. If you go to marketnode.com under the fixed income section, you'll be able to get access to the Green Node platform. With that, I'll take one last look at the to see if there are any other questions, which is so far not the case. And I would like to thank Shannon, Rico, and Pok for sharing their insights with all of us today. We're slightly over time, but not too bad. Thank you so much, and hope to have this again in the future.